lot about the struggles that toxic people bring into our lives on this channel. But I haven't ever given you a step-by-step breakdown of how to get toxic people out of your life. It's important to understand the difficulties with toxic people, but it's even more important to understand what to do when you're ready to get toxic people out of your life. Cutting toxic people out is never going to be easy. It's not going to be a nice and tidy process. It's always going to be a mess. And it's always going to push you to grow in different ways. Today, I'm going to give you a step-by-step breakdown of how you can advance by cutting toxic people out of your life. So I'm going to go over the 5 steps real quick, and then I'm going to go through each one a bit more in depth. If you're looking for more support as you go through this process, I have a free download over on my website. The link is in the description below, and you can get this step-by-step guide for cutting toxic people out of your life totally for free. Okay, so what are those 5 steps? Number 1, identify that you are ready to go no contact with a toxic person. Number 2, determine what you want and need from this boundary. Number 3, come up with a plan to implement the boundary. Number 4, get support to help you once the boundary is up. And number 5, implement that boundary. All right, so let's break those down. Step 1, identify that you are ready to go no contact with the toxic person. Now, what this step exactly is going to involve is going to vary from person to person. Some of the things you want to think about is how much pain, how much time, and how much energy this toxic person is taking up in your life. And are you willing to continue to give them all of that energy? Right? So you're going to have to think through, what is your life right now? What is it looking like? Is it at an acceptable level? Can you tolerate that stuff? Or are you ready to change some stuff up so that you get more time to do some of your other things and fulfill your other priorities, right? So one of the ways that I can tell when I'm ready to go no contact with a toxic person is when it seems like keeping that person in my life feels like an absolutely overwhelming idea, right? So like if I continue to allow things to go the way that they are right now, that sounds miserable, it sounds difficult, like it's just, that feels really, really gross to me. At that point, I know that I'm ready to go no contact. You might find yourself in a similar place. So here's a couple tips for navigating this first, identifying that you're ready step. You're probably gonna know in your heart of hearts if it's time to go no contact, right? There's a lot of advice about going no contact, and I think sometimes people do it before they're ready. So it's important to take time with this step. But you're probably gonna know when you're really ready to put in the work and really do the difficult things it's gonna take to go no contact. It's important not to force yourself to do this, right? Of course, if you are in immediate danger or anything like that, please get out of there as soon as you can. But for those of us who are not in that kind of immediate danger, it's important that we don't force ourselves. If you do that, it's gonna make it a lot harder to keep the boundary, because the truth is you weren't really ready to establish that boundary yet. When this stage where I'm ready to go no contact, that often comes when, I just feel like I've tried everything, right? There's nothing else. There's no other way I could try to talk to the person. There's no other way I could communicate my feelings or what I need. I've tried everything in the book, and it just seems like we've run out of options. For me, that's often a sign that it's time to go no contact. So you might ask yourself, do you feel like you've tried everything in the book? Okay, step number 2, determine what you want and need from this boundary. This is going to require reflecting on the different aspects of your life and what you need in order to get this toxicity out. Try to let yourself daydream a bit about how your life would be different without this toxic person. Be specific about what this boundary will bring into your life. Now, it's tempting to skip this step, but don't do that. The more concrete you are, the easier it will be to maintain the boundary in the long run. Remember, stuff gets tricky when we're trying to maintain that boundary. It might be hard to imagine your life without the toxic person, but try to push yourself to do so. The more you can envision it, the more motivated you're going to be to do this hard work and show up and keep that no contact boundary. Be sure as you're doing this to consider your immediate life, but also the ways that you show up for the people around you. If you're somebody who really wants to show up for your friends, for your family, keep those aspects of your life in mind as you try to imagine what you want and what you need from this boundary. Step number 3, come up with a plan to implement the boundary. So here's some things you need to consider as you're developing this plan. How are you going to enforce the boundary? How are you going to communicate the boundary? What supportive folks will you turn to when the process gets hard? You want to think about what implementing this boundary requires both before and after you've communicated the boundary with a toxic person. Try writing out this plan so when things get difficult, you can use it to make things more concrete. Now, they always say failure to have a plan is planning to fail. And I think in this case, that's really true. Most people don't approach setting these boundaries with a plan in place. And I think that's a mistake. This is a really hard thing to do. It's complicated. There's a bunch of emotions to work through. There's a lot going on. We need to have direction. We need to have a sense of where we've been. And a plan can really help us do that. The more you prep at this stage, right, the more you're thinking through what's going to be hard, what kind of things do I need, what stuff I can do to help myself feel better. The more you put in that work here at step 3, the easier it's going to be later on, right? You're not going to have to make decisions as much later on if you make those plans now. As you do this, try to be specific, right? The more detailed the plan, right, the more stuff you're going to have to pull on when things are getting harder later on. Step number 4, get support to help once the boundary is up. Toxic people often keep us isolated and take away a lot of our social supports. You want to take some time to beef up your support network before you establish a really firm boundary. You're likely to want to go back on your boundary without this. If you have good quality people around you, they're going to encourage you to keep up those boundaries that are helping you live the kind of life that you want and deserve. If you have trusted family or friends, that's a good start. But if you don't, you can turn to coaches, someone like me, therapists, or even survivor support groups online to beef up your network. It's a lot harder to establish and maintain firm boundaries like going no contact without a strong support network. Be creative when coming up with who to build up these relationships with. Don't give up just because the first people you think of aren't good options. Professional support, so that's people like coaches or therapists, that's a great option, but be mindful to find folks who understand toxic people. General experts in relationships will not necessarily help you. You need someone who is familiar with toxic people. Step number 5, implement the boundary. There are a million different ways to accomplish this. You developed a plan earlier on how exactly you want to do this. That plan should be based on what you need. So your goal here is to follow the plan. You may choose to directly communicate your boundary with a toxic person. You may choose not to be so direct. It depends on your situation and what you want in the end. When you say you're going to go no contact, immediately follow through on blocking the toxic person's various ways of communicating with you. Once you've blocked all the things, be ready to dive into some self-care. You need to find ways to restore yourself after such a difficult activity. Rely on your support network as the days progress. You spent the time earlier building up that network, so now that you're starting to face some of the more difficult things, use that network to help you get through. Finally, have a plan to stay busy immediately following implementing the boundary. Right? If you're more busy, if you've got lots of interesting things to do, it's going to be a bit easier for you to sustain on that boundary. If you want a breakdown of everything I talked about here, head over to my website for a free step-by-step guide to cutting toxic people out of your life. You can find that at empowermentthroughthought.com or in the description box below. Remember that establishing that firm no contact boundary is much more the start than the end of this process. Once you're comfortable with having the boundary in your life, you need to transition into long-term maintenance of that boundary and ultimately making peace with that boundary. If you're interested in those later stages of this process, I'm building a course that helps folks with these elements. It's a challenge to establish good boundaries, but it really is another beast to make peace with those boundaries. You can stay in the loop on all of the updates for the course by joining my newsletter. The link for that is in the description below. Thanks so much for spending some time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.